Hey HTDA, and welcome back to my Satisfactory 1.0 Masterclass. In each episode I'll give you one specific goal to work towards, which you should ideally be able to complete in 1 or 2 playing sessions. In this episode we'll continue to work towards completion of all 3 parts of the Phase 3 project. Specifically, we're going to make sure we have finished the versatile framework production, and we are a pretty long way actually towards getting the modular engines and adaptive control units up and running as well. Now, just as a reminder, there's going to be a link to this build in the description so that you can easily uncheck or check any alternative recipes that I'm using that you might not have, or maybe you have some that I don't that you want to use, so you can easily adjust your build to that. But just to clarify, I am going to use quite a few of the alternate builds actually in this particular episode. I'm going to use the bolted iron plate to make the iron plates a lot faster than the default rate. I am also going to be using the modular frame alt for the bolted frame. So once again, that speeds up the production speed by a lot. That means I'm going to need a lot of screws, and that is where the screw alternate comes in for the steel screw, because I'm actually producing quite a bit of steel from the previous episode, so I'm going to utilize all of that. Now, this is just to show that you don't need to be afraid of screws. It's actually really easy if you use the alternate for the steel screw, but of course you might want to do this completely different, and by all means feel free to do so. Now, after last time, I might have left you a little bit worried if you're actually playing along, because right now we're just producing pretty much anything steel related, as well as concrete and industrial beams. But don't worry, we're going to fix that right now, because we have these 6 iron nodes over here, and that's going to be plenty to do everything we need to do. First things first, I have 24 smelters making iron ingots, and you might recognize the design from before because it's exactly the same as from the previous episode where we used it in the steel mill. Now again, making a couple of these very simple straightforward blueprints saves you a lot of time moving forward. That said, just to make your factory look nice, or maybe just because you like switching things up, or because you like different styles, it is really tempting, and honestly I really love just making some variations on blueprints myself. So for example, over here I made a very simple new blueprint for the constructors, where I have 6 constructors. You can make up to 8 if you want, that actually loop back on themselves and collect all the stuff in the middle, rather than having all these splitters and merge and stuff like that on the outside. Now, this is actually slightly more compact than when you actually put the splitters on the outside, but that's not the main reason I do this. I do it mostly because that's actually really easy to tell what you're producing somewhere, because actually the outputs are going to be on top of the machines. Now, the way I've done it over here, as you can see, the belts are actually on top of the machines rather than floating above it. And in order to do that, you would actually need to first build a couple of foundations, a 4-meter foundation to be exact, and then a 1-meter foundation on top of that. Then you build the mergers, because if you actually just stack up splitters or mergers, you get a different height than what I have here. It's actually a half height higher or lower than this belt is at. So either the belt will be clipping through your building, or you have a diagonal belt, or you have a floating belt. So long story short, you'll need a couple of foundations initially to set this up like this. And again, this is where the blueprints come in, because you don't want to do that for every single part of the constructor build you use, but in the blueprint you just do it once and then you have it all ready to go. Don't forget to add in some power lines, because that will save you a lot of time as well. I'm just sticking with the metal pillar thing that I've been doing so far, just to tie the factory nicely together. Now, one benefit from a build like this compared to what I've been previously using, where we did most of the merging and splitting and things like that underground, is that this actually saves you a little bit of time, because you only need to connect the input and the output at one specific place to the logistics floor, and everything else is taken care of above ground in the plug and play from the blueprint. Whatever blueprint you're going for, you will get a lot of mileage out of it, because I currently have a total of 18 constructors making iron plates, and then another 12 of them making iron rods. Okay, so we have 3 facilities making iron ingots, and we have 6 facilities that require those iron ingots, and there's a little bit of logistics going on in order to make sure that all of that material gets where it needs to go. Okay, so the first part is pretty straightforward. This splitter over here is connected to the iron rod facility, and this is also connected to the secondary iron rod facility. Both of those iron rod facilities, so there's 12 constructors in total, can be supplied by a single incoming belt from one of the iron ingots facilities. And actually you'll have a little bit of iron ingots left over that are going to be merged in the later production stream. The second iron ingot facility is just connected to the first iron plate constructing facility, and once again we'll have some leftover iron ingots. So those are going to be merged with that belt that we just got from the iron rod production facilities. Then for the third iron ingot facility, that is actually once again connected to one of the facilities making iron plates. But then we have that third iron plate facility still left, and that is basically going to run on all the leftovers from all the previous builds. So we have that merger from the iron rods over here, along with the remains from the first iron plate facility, and that's going to go on this belt, and these are the remains from the second iron plate constructing facility. And all of that is going to be merged over here and go into that last final iron plate constructing facility. Of course, we're going to need those iron plates and iron rods as well for building a lot of other stuff, so make sure you hook it up to some of the dimensional depots as well, just by splitting off some of the resources from before. Alrighty, with all of that up and running, we are now going to move on to some of the more advanced stuff. However, in order to do that, we're going to need about a gazillion screws. To be exact, we're going to need 2,800 screws per minute, which is a lot, but it's actually only going to be produced by this small facility, well, these two facilities over here. I'm actually going to underclock once again 2 of these constructors to 50% because we only need a little bit less than 11 of them, so I have 12 over here. But using steel in order to make screws is just super easy. Don't forget to store some screws in the dimensional storage just in case. I'm really curious to find out how many people in the comments will tell me I'm crazy for using screws. Anyway, now it's time to move on to the more complicated things. Specifically, we're going to make a lot of rotors and reinforced iron plates. First of all, we're going to need 4 assemblers making iron plates. Now remember, I'm using the bolted iron plate recipe, which is 3 times as fast as the default recipe. It uses the same sort of inputs though, but if you use the default recipe, you're going to need 3 times as many assemblers. Once you start building assemblers and manufacturers and pretty much anything that requires multiple inputs in large numbers, you're going to notice that trying to avoid clipping in your logistics floor is going to be a nightmare. So I recommend take it easy on yourself. Keep in mind you're going to be building hundreds if not thousands of machines throughout this game, and if things like this really annoy you with clipping belts, then it's going to cost you hours in order to keep everything neat and clean. Now, of course, if you want to do that, that's no problem. Just keep it in mind, it is going to add substantially to your game time if you do that. And in a game that has space elevators, I don't think it's weird to assume that there's some sort of mechanism in these clipping belts that make sure that the correct item is going to go on the correct belt. I mean, we have those in real life, so I don't think it's weird to assume this game would have that as well. Either way, don't forget to add a dimensional depot and look at this logistics floor. It's starting to look pretty awesome and pretty organized. I mean, we basically have them all underneath our facility now, and we never have to look at it again. So I really think this is starting to look awesome, but as you can see from all these empty holes, we're not quite done yet. Next up on the list are rotors, and I'm just using the normal recipe here. So these 8 assemblers are making a total of 32 rotors per minute. Once you have those up and running, we're kind of getting into the home stretch of this episode, because now we're going to be making a lot of different frames. First up are the modular frames. I have 5 assemblers over here making the bolted frame alternate recipe, so we're using screws and reinforced plates to make modular frames. If you're using a different type of recipe, you're probably going to need more machines than this, but this is why I like this recipe, because it's fairly efficient in terms of how quick we're producing that. So we only need 5 assemblers. Speaking of 5 assemblers, in the back over there, I have 5 assemblers making smart plating as well, because we only need the reinforced plates as well as the rotors in order to make those. Now, we don't need those for the phase 3 production, but we are going to need the smart plating as inputs for some of the other production. And in case you're wondering, the whole point of all of this is that we're actually increasing our production by quite a lot. So for example, we're now producing 10 smart plating per minute, while before I think it was 4, so it's 2.5 times as much. And similarly, we are now producing 25 modular frames per minute, while I think before we had something like 4 or 6 as well. So this is a massive upgrade compared to our previous factory. And then here we have the real goal of this episode, and this is the 4 assemblers making versatile frameworks. Now again, this is a massive upgrade compared to how many we were producing before. It should be 20 per minute now, and that's more than we need specifically for this phase, but again, this is also kind of prepping us for the phase that comes after. Now as you can see, we need 2,500 of these, and if we would have let the original production running, we would actually be pretty close to that already probably. But 20 per minute is going to clear that up pretty quick while we do everything else. As a side note, don't forget to connect your belts up to the actual space elevator. I put it back in its original position, as you can see. And, well, I really like how our logistics floor is turning out. I mean, look at this. There is a whole bunch of stuff going on. We have a whole lot of these dimensional depots. What I like doing is if you have any resource that you're not using yet, put them back to the ground floor and have this little thing sticking out so you can easily see what it is. I have a couple of those actually around. You can see some screws over there, some more screws over here, because we do need some more screws in the future, and the smart plating that we're going to be using elsewhere. Now, of course, you can also hook this up to a sink, probably something I'm going to do in the next episode just to show you how to kind of centralize that. But in the meanwhile, we are now quickly getting to that 2,500 versatile frameworks. Now it's going a little bit quicker than it's supposed to, you could say, because I had a little bit of a surplus. But as you can see, I'm producing bunches of 5, and they're coming in pretty quickly. So yeah, that's going to be a lot of points, either towards the phase 3 completion or towards your sink, because as soon as you've completed those 2,500, you might as well just start either storing them up, because that's not a bad thing, or putting them in a sink and get a whole lot of points for that. So we have all the construction materials back in production, and that means we have no problem in scaling up any further. We are missing the copper, but that's going to be a quick fix in the next episode. And I hope it's now clear why I really want to replace my starting factory, because honestly this looks awesome. And it's look a lot better than the previous setup, just because we can make it take advantage of all the more advanced stuff that we have available. When you're making a layout like this, kind of try to plan ahead a little bit. Don't overdo it, because honestly, as long as you're a little bit conscious about what you place where and how you placed every single section compared to each other, it's going to look pretty neat and organized. Just keep in mind that it's usually a good idea to keep similarly styled buildings next to each other. So I have smelters, I have constructors, and then we have the assemblers. Depending on the number of assemblers you need, you might want to think a little bit about how you group them together, like I've done with these 5 over here. I considered overclocking just 1 in a set of 4, so that I have the equivalent of 5 of them, and then just repeating this pattern, but I figured, well, why not just change it up a little bit, just to break the monotony of having everything look the same. But at the same time, just because the style of the buildings is still very much the same, it looks pretty organized, and by doing that you have a pretty awesome looking factory without having to deal with too much things like design and stuff like that. I mean, you can, of course, there's nothing wrong with that, you just don't need to have everything look neat and organized. Everything we've done in this episode, and that's why I'm stopping here, should take you 1 or 2 playing sessions to complete. And don't forget that in the meanwhile you can unlock things like pretty much everything in tier 4, and in the next episode we'll be able to clear out most of tier 5 and 6 as well. Now, in the meanwhile, I have a question. Why is this still lighting up? There's nothing for me to unlock here. It's getting on my nerves a little bit, but anyway. Next episode, we're going to be making sure we can clear out everything else, and we're also going to be dealing with the oil processing. So if you're looking forward to that and you might need some help with that, make sure you tune in for that. If you're still here, you're awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.